Good afternoon. My name is Hal Pepper, and I'm an extension specialist with the University of Tennessee Center for Profitable Agriculture. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth and final webinar in the Developing Value-Added Agriculture Businesses webinar and workshop series. The topic today is Business Planning from a Lender's Perspective by Roy Settle, an ag lender for the past 10 years. Roy's also worked with USDA RC&D, so he has a lot of experience in this area. We're recording the webinar, and we will make all of the recorded webinars available in the next few days. Please type your name and business name into the chat box so that we'll have a record of your attendance. This is especially important for those who are wishing to have their attendance count for meeting a Tennessee Ag Enhancement Program special requirement in the value-added producer diversification sector. We also request that you keep your camera turned off and your microphone muted so we can have the best quality recording possible. The objective of these webinars is to help value-added producers learn about resources available to them as they gear up to submit a competitive application to the USDA Rural Development Value-Added Producer Grant. We're expecting USDA to announce the next round of funding for the Value-Added Producer Grant very soon, possibly this month. And today's webinar will provide some business planning tips from a seasoned ag lender. As Roy will tell you, the first step in having a successful value-added enterprise is to have a solid business plan. And Roy is vice president with First Bank and Trust. He has a lot of experience in ag lending and in value-added ag lending. And Roy, we look forward to your presentation. If you'll share your screen, we'll get started when you're ready.
Okay, let's see if I can make this work. I think it's there. It worked the first time. Now I'm be lost on it. Okay, I think we're there. So again, thanks for having me, Hal, and others with the Center for Profitable Ag. I know y'all do great work across the state, and it's always good when we have somebody coming to us that's applying for a loan for something different, that they've had some background, working with UT and the Center for Profitable Ag, because there's a lot of unknowns out there going into something like this. It's a bit of a step for a lot of folks that have been doing a great job of raising cattle, raising a crop or whatever, but taking it that next level is an exciting phase, but it can be a tricky one. As Hal said, I've been in lending for 10 years. I'd worked for USDA with Natural Resources Conservation Service and community development, really with the Appalachian RC&D Council, and work with a lot of startups and help people work with things like that, and still involved with that. But this is a great opportunity, and glad to have the opportunity to do this. So let's see here. Before we kind of get into the business plan, many lenders, and I think probably most for the USDA traditional lenders or whatever, we use the 5 C's, or what we call the 5 C's of credit when we're looking at a loan. And
Roy,
yes.
Excuse me, Roy, we can't see your screen. Could you try sharing that with us again?
Okay, let me see again. That. I'm not seeing that.
Okay, if you got your PowerPoint up and
there it is. Okay, there we go.
Okay, and then there should be a share screen button.
Right. Okay.
There you go. Once you get there, that's it. You got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thankfully, I do more in the way of lending than I do in Zoom PowerPoint. So anyways, but yeah, we'll kind of get on to what I was starting to talk about, the 5 C's of credit that lenders use when looking at a loan, because you're going to want to be able to kind of address this somewhat in your business plan. But it's just a good thing. I always try to talk about this when I do something with producers, is making sure you're kind of ready when you go to make an application. The first of the 5 C's of credit is the character. This is who you are, your reputation, even your credit history and whatnot. So all those are important points. If you can do free credit report, Credit Karma, or whatever. You see some things out there that you think, well, you kind of know what they are, but even if it's something you dispute, if it's a few $100s, I would encourage you to go ahead and pay that off, because those are things that just kind of show up, and you really don't want to have to explain any more than you have to. So that's an important thing, is to kind of look at those things and try.
Boy, I think we lost your audio. Could you unmute? And
Okay.
sorry about that. My fault.
Yeah. Well, no, that may be me. I'm trying to do this 2 different platforms. So at what point did we lose it, you think?
I think hit the second C of credit, I think.
Yeah, capacity, that's talking about your ability to make payments on a loan, or just pay your monthly expenses even before this new enterprise. What kind of ability do you have aside from this? Because we want to see what you're looking to do, but we want to see where you are currently otherwise too. The next one is capital. Are you in a position to make a down payment, or do you have accumulated assets that could be used for collateral in lieu of a down payment? This shows that you're somebody that's got the ability to make money in whatever enterprise that you've done. The fourth one, conditions. What's the current economy like? We're going into some things. Interest rates are likely going to be rising, we're hearing. There's a lot of opportunities out there, but there's challenges too. What's the demand for the product that you're wanting to do? It may be something new. Is nobody doing it because they're not as savvy as you are, or are they not doing it because there's really not much demand for it? That's something you need to really ask yourself. Just because it's unique doesn't mean it's going to sell. And then collateral, sort of address this on capital, but do you have collateral that you will have or that you will acquire as part of this deal to help secure the loan? A lender wants to make sure that if in the unforeseen thing that you can't make the payment, is there something to help pay them back? And that may be, collateral that you already have, something you're going to buy with the process, or maybe using a USDA guarantee with SBA or rural development. Okay, why do you need a business plan? In this case, maybe the value-added producer grant or SBA or whoever says you have to write one. That can be a good enough reason. The bank or lender is requiring you to do one. That can be another good reason. I think this is the most important. Writing the business plan will teach you more about what you're wanting to do than you really ever imagine. You'll learn a lot about your operation, maybe some shortfalls, maybe some good things about it too, but hopefully help you address some things that you may not have thought about as you go through this process. So you hear a lot of things, the process is more important than the product. I think a business plan can be that, although there's reasons why you need to have that final product for lenders or a grant or whatever. Benefits of that, help you understand the stages and starting and managing your business. It can be a roadmap, kind of help you find your path, how to get there. It can be a way to help you kind of think about the key elements of your business. And you think, well, I know this is the final thing, but you need to make sure you think about all the stages that it takes to get to that final goal. And it can help you with funding, finding business partners, and investors want to see that you have a well thought out plan and that you're able to really put something together and know what it's going to need to be. It can be a way to attract employees or customers too with that plan. And last but not least, you may not want to think about this, but a business plan may help you realize that, this is just not going to work, or I'm just not willing or able to do what it takes. And that's an unfortunate thing to think about, but it's better to know that before you've invested, years of your life and thousands of dollars too. And what format works for you? There's a couple of formats out there. One is the lean startup format. That's just a one-page thing, just some key points and everything. But that's probably not going to be enough, certainly for the value-added program and most things. But even if you're doing something small, you may think you need one. It's not a bad idea
I'm logged in now.
to do something like that. So
Do what?
Sorry, the traditional business plan format, it's very detailed. It shows you thought things through. It's very detailed and quantified. Not all are the same, but you do need to go into detail on the sections that apply to your plan. And this is what, if somebody is asking you to do a business plan, this is likely what they're looking for. And the components of the traditional one, as we're talking about, you've got an executive summary. It's kind of like your elevator speech for this. Just say, this is kind of what we're looking to do here. You're not getting into nuts and bolts. You're not getting into numbers, but we are going to grow grapes out here. We're going to process them into wine or jelly or whatever, and then we're going to market them this way. That's kind of what your executive summary is. Description, the company, tell about who you are, and the need that you're looking to fill. Like, that there's a demand for this, but people are having to go 3 states away to find this. And tell how you're unique there, and what you're prepared to do, and list some of your strengths and competitive advantages that you may have too. Market analysis. This needs to get into some detail and some numbers, and you may need to get help with that. But it will show kind of what your competitors are doing and how you can beat them, or how you got a chance to improve on what they're doing. Another component's your organization and management. If this is a fairly large organization, a lot of people, you need to tell about who they are, what they do, and why they're qualified, not just because it's your brother-in-law, your dad, kind of tell about some background that they have. If it's just you and 1 or 2 family members, which I think will be in the case for a lot of these, talk about what your abilities are. And if you've got some shortfalls in there, tell how you're going to address this lack of this or that, whether it be outside help or training or whatever. The service or product line. And this is where you talk about very specific detail, what you're doing, what you're selling. You're doing a lot of jams and jellies. You're doing smoked meats. You're doing packaged meats, whatever that may be. This is where you talk about what you're going to be doing. And if you've got something where you've developed something that's kind of unique, you need to talk about how you're going to protect that. Now, you may be doing a patent or trademarking or whatever. And before you share that with people, it's not a bad idea to get a non-disclosure agreement signed with a lender. I had to do that recently for somebody. We're actually not going to do the loan at this time. But basically what, I'm signing off on there, that if information on them gets out and they find it's me, they'll probably take us to court. So that's an important thing. If you've got something, a unique way of doing something, don't be ashamed to realize that, and make sure that you're protecting yourself. Marketing and sales. You may be making the best thing out there, the tastiest thing or whatever, but if you really don't know how to sell it, you're not going to be successful. If you've done something similar with another kind of product, or maybe even not quite that close, but tell about how you have done that. What did you do to sell that? If you're not prepared to do that, talk about how you plan to do that, or who's going to help you do that. The funding request, and this is where you're going to be asking for funding, whether it be for a grant or a loan. You need to get into talking about this, really not just for, hey, we're looking for $50,000 to do this. This is where you show that you've really done the planning for this. And, tell about how much funding you're going to need for the next 3 to 5 years. Now, this request that you're making up front may not be enough to do that, but you need to be able to address how you plan to come up with the money. What are your other sources of funding? Is it money that you've got? You're going to go for some other things or whatnot. But this is where you really get into talking about what you're planning to do, how you're going to use the money. I lay it out there in a table. So we're going to have salaries, and the first year is going to be this much. Second year, it's going to be kind of growing along through there. And this will go possibly well beyond the terms of what this funding request is, but you want to show that you've really thought that through. That you know what it's going to take, and that it may be a year or two before you really see that you're going to be profitable. But don't blow smoke and say, well, I know we can do this and we'll be making money right away. For some smaller things that you might be doing, you've already got, maybe it's a dairy and you're wanting to go from fluid milk that you're selling to somebody that's then turning it into milk or cheese or whatever, and you're wanting to do something there on your farm. So you may have, in some cases, a shorter process to get to that goal. In some cases, it may be a long goal, there too. But talk about really that really what this is going to cost. I can't really kind of get too far into that. And I guess from a lender's point of view, that's, one of the most important parts of this for us is to see that you really know what this is going to cost, and you've done your research, and whether it's been talking to somebody nearby or a long distance away. And this can be a challenge to find out what this stuff will cost, and you may have to get in the truck and drive a distance. If there's somebody down the road doing the same thing, they may not be too excited about kind of sharing what things are costing for them because they see you as competition. But if you're going to the Tennessee Agritourism meeting or someplace, or wherever you found somebody that's doing what you want to do, reach out to them. Don't just show up and expect them to spend the day with you, but get to know them over the phone or email or whatever. And then see if you can make a visit and ask them, will they share some things? Because, there's lots of plans on paper, but the best plan is to talk to somebody who did what you're wanting to do 10 years ago, and they're still doing it and doing well. That's successful, there. Anybody can type something up, but you want this detail. But I know I'm kind of going on and on about this, but I think this is vitally important. Your financial projections, and that's where you're trying to show us that, this is how you're going to be successful. Finding the balance between optimistic and realistic, that's critical. UT, I know they do crop budgets for a lot of different things. They may get into some of this stuff, where you're getting into doing some of these things for other stuff. And, don't just necessarily pick the one for like corn production where you're going to get 250 bushels to the acre and it's only going to cost you this. You need to look at that and think about what are production in your area for somebody else that's doing that, or find something that kind of shows that. Really, as a lender, I like to see somebody that is showing that, they're pretty conservative on their production, because there's going to be years that are going to be pretty lean if you're dealing with a crop like that. So, and I think this is going to vary. If you're basing this on some kind of crop that you're going to grow, that can be very weather dependent, that can be a challenge, because you can have very high yields, low yields, or if you're just kind of starting to do something, if you're early in great production, they're just starting to produce there, use your projection at the lower side of what is shown that this type of grape, this variety in your area will do. And then when you're looking at your costs, you want to kind of take those higher. A lender doesn't want to see something that says, well, if everything goes right and I get this kind of production, I'm able to make this kind of sales, I think it'll work. Well, I can tell you right there that, and as y'all all know, everything is not going to go right. You're not going to always get the top production. You're always not going to get the top price for something. So we want to see lower in the way of income and higher in the way of expenses. And if it looks like it's going to break even or look like it might do a little bit that way, then that's something we're going to be more more excited about looking at doing some funding with. But to come in and think everything's going to go just right and expect somebody to want to fund that, that's overly optimistic. Obviously, you're optimistic. You wouldn't be doing this if you weren't. But you need to be prepared to get real about that. Okay, we're more about financial projections, and I may have already kind of covered into some of those, but if you've got an established business and you're already doing part of this, include your current income statements, balance sheets, and cash flows that show for the past, 3 to 5 years. A lender is going to want to see past year's tax returns. This is a new startup. You're not going to have that. So we're going to be dealing more with the projections, complete projections. But if you've got something past, show that you've already been successful in something else. Successful people are more likely to be successful in something else. If you've got collateral that you're willing to put up for the loan, this is where you talk about that, whether it be land, livestock, equipment, other assets you may have. You may have a CD you're willing to put up or something like that. But if it's a new business, you want to create that prospective outlook, as we mentioned before, for about the next 3 years at least, to show that you've really thought this through. So in that, include your operating costs, labor, utilities, raw materials, supplies, debt service. If you are pulling those from somebody else's research, admit that. Say, this is where this is coming from. I mean, that can give you some credibility, but to know that this is where you're coming from on that. And these projections should line up with that funding request. Too, you don't want to have your funding request is going this direction, but then your financial projections really don't match up. It's like, well, is this the same thing? You want these things to be what they need to be. If you've got the ability to use some kind of graphs and charts, that can be a great way to illustrate that and kind of tell your story there. Numbers, somebody that's used to looking at numbers, that's an easy thing. But a graph showing growth, projections or whatever, it can be something that catches the eye. Don't go overboard with that kind of stuff. But if you've got something that shows pretty good in there, be prepared to use that. The appendix, and there's a lot of things that we've kind of talked about here that you'll want to reference those. You can't just load everything into that business plan. You want it to be thorough, but it needs to be concise. And you can have things in there that you may just say see appendix for that. If they want to go deeper in there, this is a place to do and deal with that. Items in there. This is, and going back to where we talked about your team. I don't know how many, and there's not really a way to tell, I don't know, but how many of you have a resume about yourself and what you're doing? If you've grown up working on a farm there and really never applied for a job, you may not have one. Hal, I don't know if y'all talked about this kind of stuff, but if you're trying to sell your business, but you're also trying to sell yourself too. So I would recommend doing a resume, and you can find lots of online things. It doesn't have to be great detail, but well, I've worked on this farm all my life. Well, what does that mean? How can you go deeper and talk about, what you've done? Maybe something you did when you went to college that you worked here and there or whatever. So this is a way to really kind of showcase yourself there. Especially when we talk about the team, if that team is really just you and maybe a spouse or a sibling or a parent or whatever, this is a way to do that. If your business startup, whether it's the new thing that you're wanting to do, or just the operation itself has attracted some positive news, feel free to put that in there. Again, don't put it in the body of it, but put it in there as kind of backup documentation that tells about you that, well, hey, they're a mover and a shaker. They've attracted some attention out there. They were successful enough to get people out there, the media out to see what they were doing. So I think this is a very important thing for the farm side of things. It's pretty typical. The large application that I got recently through the bank for a business, they included resumes for their key people. And this, just because this person is an engineer or they're a senior vice president or whatever, what does that mean? And again, you can't cover all that in a write-up, but you can do that. So I would strongly recommend that you consider doing a resume for yourself, especially if you're applying to somebody that doesn't know you or whatever. So it gives them some more background. Product data or pictures. This is where you can go deeper and talking about what you're doing. If you've already got some labeling, set some things up, display it nicely, put a little time into that. You don't have to get a professional there, but if it's jellies and jams or whatever, put up a checkered tablecloth and a nice display. And this shows about your marketing ability. That's what it in some ways can do if you're talking about pictures, but also talk about what you're doing, that you've got nutritional information about what you're doing. These are value added. So I'd say almost all these are going to be food, but not necessarily everything. But talk about your product and that you are ready to go to market with it. Letters of reference. Again, this may not apply in every situation, but if you work for somebody that has some bearing on what you're looking to do, but it's in the past or whatever, recently or further back, if there's somebody that you think is a person of influence that could write you a letter of reference about your ability to market or whatever, that's not a bad thing. And again, if this grant is pretty small or whatever you're applying for, you may not need to go so deep on this, but again, I don't know what kind of size or what kind of project we're talking about, but and then licenses and permits. If you're especially doing meat processing, that's a big thing right now. I'm working with two different groups. One is a producer-owned cooperative here in the Northeast Tennessee. Not necessarily going to do a loan on it because they're trying to get everything funded other ways and with cooperative members, but they're going to have to go through a lot of licenses and permits. And while they may not be there at that point, but you need to show the two things, I guess. One, that shows that you're aware that these things are needed. And then also, that you've already got them if you're part of the way there. Because some of those things can be fairly lengthy processes, and that you've got the ability to make that application and be successful in getting that. So again, this may not have much bearing on you, but if you're doing food processing, in most cases, it's going to be different than just selling the raw produce or vegetables or whatever that may be. So you want to show that you're aware of this need. Patents, legal documents. If you've got something that's patented, show that, or legal documents that you've got the ability to do whatever there. Probably would fall into this too if what you're doing. A lot of on-farm things, fall under that A1 zoning. But if you're going to have to get something rezoned to do what you're looking to do, this could be a good place to talk about that you're prepared to do that, or that you can do this, or you've already got it rezoned. Again, this shows your readiness and gives more confidence to a lender or grantor. If you've already got somebody that's willing to buy what you're looking to do, a store, a restaurant, or whatever, even if you may not have a contract, if they would give you maybe a letter of intent that's saying, if you can produce X, Y, and Z to meet my standards, I have the need, or I'm buying this much of this right now, and I would like to buy it from you locally if you can meet the standards. That's not necessarily a guarantee, and until you're producing the product, they can't guarantee that, but that shows that you have that market there. And that kind of goes with your market analysis, that you're going to jump out there and be the biggest blueberry producer and you're going to do all this stuff. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's just not a market, is that feasible? And anything else that may fall into there. So, and some closing thoughts. And I know we're kind of running through this, but I'm hoping maybe we can get into some questions, or maybe talk about some of the different things that people are looking to do, and maybe we can kind of shed some light on that. The format, this is very important. If you are, check before you start writing your business plan, see if that lender or funder, if they have a certain format that they want you to use. If they do, I would start following that format before you pull one off the internet for the SBA or whatever. But if they have one, follow that exactly to the letter. And I used to do a lot of grant writing when I worked for USDA. And one of the things that I found to be successful was that I would kind of go through, and as I'm writing my application and they're listing all these things, I would title my application, that section of the application, the same way that they had in there so that they would know that I was addressing that. And sometimes with grants, you may have people reviewing that really aren't a professional grant reviewer. And this helps them to know that you've addressed everything that they asked for. And that's a thing. And, you know, if they're not getting around to looking at this thing until just before it's due, and if they're getting back to it, there may not be time. So you want to make sure when you put that application in there, even if you turn it in early, that you've addressed everything that they want. But ask them if they've got a format, and then try to follow that, or if they've got an example or whatever. You may have already written one up for another lender or funder that you want to use. And you can submit it to them for, say, is this okay? Or do I need to do, do I need to do something different? If it's not, you should have probably the right components there. You may just need to rearrange the pieces and parts for those components to make it simpler, and just rearrange that. But again, make sure you give them what they're asking for there. And then always have someone you trust to review and offer a constructive criticism. If the lender or funder offers to review that, make sure you take advantage of that, because, you know, they know what they're looking for. And if they can, you know, point something out to you beforehand that you make sure you address that you kind of missed, it's better to do that. And I'm a procrastinator in some ways. I used to write a lot of grants, and my deadline would be, I knew that it needed to be shipped by such and such, and I knew what time the FedEx drop was at the airport or whatever. And that's really not the best way to do this. If you can get those things early and take a look at it, or get somebody, your county extension agent, maybe somebody else that you know that does lending, maybe not what you're asking for, or see if they will do that, you know, for you. But get somebody else to kind of take a look at it and show them the format. This is what they're asking for, and this is what I'm submitting. What do you think is there? I think it can go a long ways to help you make it through that. And questions, be glad to talk about some of those things. And Hal, I guess if we go back to the screen, and maybe you and I talk just a little bit about some things there too, related to any services y'all might offer in the way of review.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Roy. Yeah, if we can have enough lead time, we're happy to get involved with helping edit, take a look at what you've put together from the standpoint of your value-added producer grant. I know the USDA rural development specialists have regional offices, and they have specialists in each one of those offices. We had Chuck Morris present yesterday about where those locations are. So they're happy to give you their advice in looking at your application. We're happy to get involved in that as well. So yeah, I want to go back to something you said about having a resume in your business plan. You mentioned that that's important. And with the value-added producer grant, there's a section to tell about your qualifications and your experience. So my suggestion there would be, don't sell yourself short. Be sure and tell about all of your experience and training, so that the grant reviewers will understand that you've got the ability to manage your business, and that you've got the ability to manage a grant if you receive it. Yeah, and there's also a section in there that talks about employees that you may have or may have in the future, and what qualifications they're going to have Well, even if you don't have employees now and you don't think you will, you still want to answer that question as to, if I do get employees in the future, here are the qualifications they're going to have. Because as you know, Roy, from your experience with writing grants, answering every single question is a really important part of the process. You've got, as you mentioned, there's grant reviewers that may not be as familiar on that, and you never know who is actually reviewing it. So you want to make sure that when you submit an application, you answer every question. You may find that there's a question later in the body of your application that sounds very similar to a question you already answered, and you don't want to say, see the answer to question number 2, because that's a good way to get scored poorly on your application. You're going to want to take every single question and answer it as if you have not answered it previously in your application. I hope that makes sense. The other thing you mentioned was letters of reference. So if you're applying for a value-added producer grant, working capital grant, letters of reference are required from customers and suppliers to show that you have a track record of success with your business. So, that's another thing that sometimes people think, oh, that's not that important. Well, it's another thing that you get scored on every single section, and you want to get as many points as possible when your application is scored. So if it says have 2 or more letters, you want to make sure you have at least 2, not just 1. So yeah, I really appreciate your sharing these things with us. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but I want to encourage folks to submit their questions. If anybody has one, we'd be glad to entertain those, and I know Roy would too.
Sure, Hal, and you raised some good points there. I noticed there's some cattle farmers, meat producers in there, and if some are looking at doing meat processing, there are some exemptions. I'm not an expert, but if you're doing something large enough that you're going to have some rezoning done, I know there's been at least one operation in Tennessee that was looking to do a larger, when I say larger, maybe 100 head a week meat processing plant, and that had to be rezoned. And in most communities, that's going to be the most intensive or whatever industrial zoning, and that one failed there because they just hadn't kind of done their homework or whatever that might be. I don't really know the case, so I can't really speak to that, but make sure that if you're going to have a property rezoned to get something done, go ahead and talk with the planning commission and make sure that's what you're doing. But I think a lot of these operations under the agriculture exemption, you're probably going to be okay, but that is something you don't want to get part of the way down the road with and hit a wall.
Yeah, that's really important, Roy. I think for folks getting a value-added producer grant, they're probably not going to be asking for a grant to do slaughter, but they may be asking for some help on the processing costs and marketing costs, because that's really what a value-added producer grant pays for, is processing and marketing costs. But one thing that you are required to include is if you're planning to get your animals processed at a specific location, then you've got to have a letter of reference in your grant application from the processor that you plan to use to show the grant reviewers that, hey, I know where I'm going to get my products, where I'm going to get my cattle processed, and I've got a letter of reference that is committing to providing me those processing services, and that's pretty important in the situation we're in right now, where that sometimes it's hard to get a processor lined up. So the grant review team really wants to see that you've already taken care of that question, and you have someone lined up to do your processing for you. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Hal, and that if you're new to somebody, a process, you're going to start doing something, you come up and say, hey, when can I get some time I know a year ago, it was a year or more, and it may
Another
still
hardware store down there.
close to
Jerry's
that.
Hardware. Huh.
So just make sure that you're going to be able to get that processing time, allocate it for you every 2 weeks, every month, every 2 months, or whatever. That needs to maybe be addressed in your letter of reference from them too.
Absolutely. Absolutely needs to be in there. I'm glad you talked about that.
Yeah. I'm not sure I can really tell anything about what other people are looking to do to maybe address. I don't want to pick on anybody because I don't know anybody here, but what they're looking to do. I see vineyards and orchards and different things like that. So it's better to ask a question early on than later. And if you've got a question, if you've got a lender there you're working with in your community, by all means, go with them. I think my email is somewhere in here. If you want to shoot me an email question that you want to know the answer to, but you don't necessarily want the lender that you're going to be applying to know that you don't know what that means, by all means, shoot me an email and I'll try to address that for you so that you can approach that. It's no fault to not know something about necessarily a discipline you're not familiar with, but I'd be glad to do this because again, I'm up in East Tennessee and I know it's not feasible and I'm not looking to try to do that, but I would be glad to answer questions, to kind of help you maybe get ready for whoever you're going to apply to, whether it be USDA or this value added or especially another lender, which is more the perspective I bring to it.
That's good, Roy. If you don't mind, if you could type your email address in the chat box there, and we'll all have that for everybody to see so that they can email you later. And you mentioned another good point there. It's important to check with the granting agency to make sure that what you're thinking about doing is an eligible project for the grant, and that the expenses that you plan to submit for reimbursement, that those are eligible expenses. The interesting thing about one of these grants, the value added producer grant, if you submit an ineligible expense as part of your application, that's most likely going to get it thrown out. It's not like they're going to contact you and say, oh, resubmit this with changing that. You can get a heads up on that if you will talk to your rural development specialist in advance of the submission deadline. And that's what I would really encourage you to do, is talk to them, make sure that what you're wanting to do is eligible before you ever start writing your application. That'd really be wise. Okay, well, I don't see any questions in the chat box. So thank you, Roy, so much for your presentation today. We really appreciate your taking the time to share this information with us. I'll be sending an email with an evaluation this afternoon to all of you on the webinars. And so I'd appreciate your watching for that email and responding to that evaluation. Thank all of you for participating in this webinar series. I'll look forward to seeing many of you at the workshops next week. And I'll be sending an email out today or the next day or so to all of you who are registered for the workshops with information about the location and other details. So I hope all of you have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Yep. Be kind evaluating my technical skills getting the presentation up too.
You did fine. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.